They are living the life on the outside of what seems to be a healthy, happy teenager.
Tonight is the night. It's now or never.
But instead, they also have these demons.
Hang yourself, jump off a building, stab yourself.
60,000 text messages between the two.
Every turn of the story is always in the headlines.
A, quote, systematic campaign of coercion.
I just don't understand how someone can do that.
We'd never seen a case like this. Mattapoisett is what we call off Cape. It's just off of Cape Cod. It's coastal.
Mattapoisett is sort of a quintessential New England beach town. It's a very friendly town where everyone seems to know each other.
There's a lot of fishermen. A lot of the fishing industry is there.
Conrad Roy is a teenager who grew up in Mattapoisett, Massachusetts. He comes from a working class family. He has a mother, Lynn, who was a hospice nurse, and two sisters, and his father, also named Conrad, owns a tugboat business.
His entire family was involved in the fishing industry, so it was really in Conrad's blood. And that's not surprising considering the community where he comes from and where he grew up. He played baseball. He was living the life of what many teenagers would live in Massachusetts. His parents were divorced, but they still were in his life, and he was still very much in their lives.
Conrad's social anxiety and depression definitely flared up when his parents divorced when he was 16.
Hi, this is Conrad Roy. I've created a monster out of myself the past few years because of my depression. Racing thoughts.
Conrad recorded a video once where he's just speaking to the camera. And throughout the video, you can see he's at one point positive and then almost immediately turns negative. And then you can see how he tries to fight himself out of that dark hole. So he was very troubled, but he also, on some levels, seemed somewhat hopeful that he could cope with it. He said, "Happiness is conscious thoughts. It's as though he knew that you had to work to be happy."
Conrad has a difficult time at school. He says he's very lonely. He says he has a difficult time making friends. And in the midst of these mental health struggles, he asks his mother if he can switch schools, hoping that that will lead to a more peaceful time for him during high school. Ultimately, switching schools is not a success, and he takes a sabbatical and works with his father on the tugboat. After the sabbatical, things generally seem to be going better for Conrad. He graduates high school, he gets his captain's license, and his family believes that things are improving for him.
Conrad and Michelle, they meet in Florida when their families are on vacation in sort of a random connection where someone that, the family that Conrad is staying with knows the Carters, and that's how they meet. Michelle is from Plainville, not on the coast, more of a bedroom community, bedroom suburb for Boston.
It is a white, middle to upper class neighborhood in Massachusetts. Michelle plays softball, and she has a few friends on the team there. The few friends that she does have say that she texts them a lot, she's very needy.
Michelle Carter had her own mental health issues. She had an eating disorder, and she sought treatment and got treatment for that. And so Michelle and Conrad seem to have this common characteristic where they are living the life on the outside of what seems to be a healthy, happy teenager. But instead, they also have these demons. They live probably about 45 to an hour separated from each other, so it's not like they would necessarily cross paths here in Massachusetts.
Their relationship largely plays out online. They met a handful of times, but most of their interactions are via text message.
They have these issues that each deals with, and that's what they share, and that's what they talk about. And Michelle is supporting Conrad by having him talk about what's bothering him and his depression and why he feels that way. And to a certain degree, she understands.
Conrad and Michelle communicate quite frequently, and he expresses to her that he feels like a bit of a failure. At one point, Conrad compares him and Michelle to Romeo and Juliet, and she says something along the lines of, "I would love to be your Juliet." And when Conrad asks her if she remembers what happens at the end of that story, she is taken aback and says, "Absolutely not. We're not going to die." On July 12, 2014, Conrad begins his day by going to the beach with his mother and his sisters. And while he is moving about his day, he's texting Michelle several times throughout the day.
It's in the evening hours that he ends up in the Kmart parking lot in Fairhaven.
At that time, he is still texting Michelle. He's saying that he wishes she was there, and she's telling him that she wishes she could be there to hold his hand and tell him that she loves him. And then at some point during the evening, he gets out of his car and calls Michelle 2 times.
And at one point, she realizes something's gone wrong. She starts to reach out to his family, first to his sister and then to his mother. Where is he? Have you heard from him? Do you know what happened? I'll help you look for him.
The next morning, Conrad isn't at home.
It's the next morning where she says, "Conrad, I love you so much. Please tell me this is a joke. I'm so sorry. I didn't think you were being serious."
And police find his pickup truck in the Kmart parking lot. Conrad is dead.
Roy's body was found in his pickup truck in the Kmart parking lot in Fairhaven. His phone inside, along with a gas-powered water pump.
When police found Conrad, they began their sort of cursory investigation of what seemed to be a straightforward suicide. There are a number of text messages between Michelle and Lynn Roy and Michelle and Conrad's sisters where they talk about his death.
In the weeks following Conrad's death, his girlfriend reached out to his grief-stricken mother via text. "You did not fail him, not even a little bit. He had his mind set on taking his life. There was nothing anyone could do to save him, no matter how hard they tried. If anything, it's my fault, and it's something I'll never forgive myself for."
At the time, I believe the family did not realize perhaps the extent of the relationship between Michelle and Conrad, especially since it was happening digitally.
Michelle has taken on this persona of the suffering girlfriend who was left behind. The boyfriend committed suicide, and now she's left heartbroken.
Michelle organizes a fundraiser for Conrad called Homers for Conrad. And it's a bit odd because the fundraiser actually is set in her town of Plainville. At some point, someone asks Michelle if they could move the fundraiser to Mattapoisett, and she seems very defensive over it, as if someone is trying to take the idea from her or take credit for the fundraiser. And at the fundraiser, many people report Michelle being very happy and being the center of attention. A few months after Conrad's passing, police show up at Michelle's school and request to see her phone, which she turns over to them. Police find upwards of 60,000 text messages between the two.
I was scared because he attempted suicide before.
Right.
And so I knew that, I just had a feeling that no matter what, I feel like it was always on his mind.
Police have been looking through Conrad's text messages, and now they see Michelle's end as well.
These volume of text messages were released, and suddenly it was revealed what had actually happened. Until those last days before he committed suicide, Michelle Carter appears to be very supportive. All the text messages are filled with love and support and encouragement. She wants him to get help. She reminds him of what's good in his life. And she also reminds him pretty frequently of how much she cares for him as well. So that's what's so heartbreaking about this, is that all of a sudden we start to see a change. We start to see suddenly Michelle takes a different tactic in dealing with Conrad's depression and his darkness. Michelle actually was encouraging him, just Google it, just Google generators. Find out how to do it. Not only pushing him emotionally, but giving him practical means and practical help to make it happen. There are moments in the days leading up to when he committed suicide that he seems to have doubts. He actually talks about his guilt, and he doesn't want to hurt his sisters. He doesn't want to hurt his family. He doesn't want them to feel depressed or to feel guilt. And Michelle actually tells him they'll be fine. She'll help take care of them. They'll move on. She continues to press him. And this is going on for 4 to 5 days before he actually committed suicide. So by the time we get to July 12th, her first text comes at like 4 in the morning. And it's something like, "Did you do it?" Because again, she's to a point where she's almost daring him. And over the course of the day, she continues to say, "Have you done it? What are you doing? Just go to the parking lot, go and do it." And the texts turn into 2 phone calls, 2 pivotal phone calls. We don't have a transcript of what was said in those phone calls, but we believe that during one of those phone calls, based on what investigators found, is when he committed suicide and when he actually died. It's later when she texts her friend and she very clearly and definitively explains what happened, that she was on the phone with him and that he got out of the truck and she told him to get back in. I think many people very instantly judged Michelle Carter for being evil, for being a villain, and no one could understand why in the world she would do this. We'd never seen a case like this where someone was being held accountable for their text messages, and someone was being charged with involuntary manslaughter when she wasn't even present for the death itself.
I cried a lot.
The family has since read every text.
Do you think there could be any excuse for the actions?
It's inconceivable. I just don't understand how someone could do that.
Her words are not protected, Your Honor. Her words are harmful, offensive, and likely to cause an immediate violent act. She stays on the phone with him to ensure that he's dead.
If you can imagine Conrad's family and the community all thinking that Michelle is a heartbroken girlfriend, all of that seems like a fraud. Every turn of the story was always in the headlines.
I'd like Ms. Carter to take the witness stand, please.
In an unexpected move, the defendant, Michelle Carter, is called to the witness stand, the Plainville woman waiving her right to a jury trial.
He's better off going with the judge who's going to focus on the law, as opposed to a jury that might be more swayed by the emotion of this case.
The prosecution really portrayed Michelle Carter as someone who was doing all of this deliberately in order to get attention.
All you have to do is turn on the generator and you will be free and happy. Who would do this and why? It suggests the evidence will show that the defendant was a very needy person who craved attention.
It was quite startling when you listened to the opening statements from the prosecution talk about a teenager in that way. I mean, typically we're used to hearing prosecutors and defense attorneys and judges talk about adults, but this was a 17-year-old girl.
You get to the beach, what's his demeanor like? How's he acting?
No.
Conrad Roy's younger sister testifying today she saw no warning signs in the hours before his suicide. Her testimony helping the prosecution prove that suicide was not Conrad's idea, and his girlfriend, Michelle Carter of Plainville, talked him into going through with something he'd attempted nearly 2 years earlier.
The defense really focused on the idea that Conrad Roy committed suicide and that he made the choice, that Michelle, although she was sending these text messages, she wasn't present. She didn't put the tools in his hands to do it.
She was dragged into this.
The medical examiner found that the cause of death for Conrad Roy was suicide, which was also another factor. How do you bring an involuntary manslaughter case when the cause of death is suicide?
There is no statute in Massachusetts outlawing suicide. There is no statute in Massachusetts saying it is against the law to assist or help in a suicide.
The defense attorney also focused on Michelle's mental health, trying to repeatedly remind the judge that she was a troubled teenager herself and that she never had the tools to counsel or to manage a friend or a boyfriend who was suffering the way Conrad was suffering. The judge decides to give an explanation for his decision and for his verdict, but he hasn't told us what that verdict is.
Michelle Carter dropped her head into her hands and sobbed.
He spoke of it continually. He secured the generator.
But when Judge Lawrence Moniz finally announced his verdict,
Ms. Carter, please stand.
Carter stood silent and composed.
And his family members are bracing. And I believe that Michelle Carter thinks she's going to be found not guilty.
Ms. Carter, please stand.
I believe that Michelle Carter thinks she's going to be found not guilty.
This court, having reviewed the evidence and applied the law thereto, now finds you guilty.
It was a very dramatic verdict reading.
Guilty of involuntary manslaughter, not because of the barrage of text messages Carter sent to Conrad Roy in the months leading up to his death, the judge said, but rather because after Roy's pickup filled with carbon monoxide from a generator and he got out, Carter told him over the phone to get back in, then did nothing except listen to his final breaths.
She doesn't call for help. She's aware of the toxic environment in the truck. She's aware of what's happening, and she doesn't do anything.
This has been a very tough time for our family, and we'd like to just process this verdict that we're happy with.
She was sentenced to 15 months in prison, so she remained free for some time before her appeals ran out.
She gets to go home tonight into her nice home
And whatever, she got to stay in Massachusetts, she could be at Six Flags tomorrow. You know, what kind of justice is that?
Ms. Carter will now be taken into custody.
A year and a half after being convicted of involuntary manslaughter in a landmark case over text messages, Michelle Carter is now behind bars at the Bristol County Jail.
This is the day that we've been looking forward to coming to an end of our involvement in this case. We feel that justice has been served.
She was released in January of 2020. In the end, because of good behavior, she served a little bit under a year. I'll be very curious to see how it impacts Michelle Carter's life. What will she be able to do in life without people knowing what happened?
I was very surprised that Michelle was found guilty because of the way that the law was written at the time and is still written in Massachusetts. It is still not illegal to coerce someone or encourage someone to commit suicide in Massachusetts.
I would like to make one thing clear. Conrad's law has nothing to do with seeking justice for my son. This law has everything to do with preventing this from happening again to others who are struggling with mental illness.
The case was incredibly depressing and disturbing, and I think anyone who knows a teenager or anyone who really has a phone had to take pause and think about the sort of messages that we send each other and the impact those messages have.
Every step is filled with a purpose. Every step is for his boy who loved the water he called Coco, and for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention.
I'm doing it just because, I think he might be proud of me, to do this for him. And, I'm just like, and I'm doing this because, I don't want anyone to go through the pain that, I had to deal with. Especially losing a son and losing a son to suicide is the worst thing imaginable. And if just raising money for this foundation can just save one life and stop the pain that I've had to deal with, it would definitely be worth it.